So, this particular podcast is a long time in the making. In fact, I would say 25 years in the making. But I'm very, I have to start off by saying I'm very humbled and honoured to have you here. And I really, really appreciate the fact that you've come in. And I'm sitting with Antoinette Kennedy, who was actually the judge that sentenced me when I was 26 years old for the crime of knowingly concerning the importation of a quantity of MDMA into Australia.
Oh, thank you very much for inviting me. It really was very generous of you. It's no difficulty to me, particularly since you've done so well since. So you're one of my successes.
And you know what? I remember when it was all happening, Antoinette, and I remember I had been sent to I found out who the judge was going to be, and of course your lawyers are always telling you, hey, we don't want to get this guy, and we don't want to get this guy, and I remember saying who I'd got, and I remember the chap who was my counsel at the time, he said to me, you've got the best judge. And I'm like, why? He goes, because Antoinette is known, female judge, but known for being lenient and compassionate towards a person's situation. So really now, Mitch, it's all about how you handle this as a person yourself. And that wasn't about, I remember at the time when I was arrested, what was going through my head was, at some stage, buddy, you're going to end up in front of a judge. And between now and then, you better make yourself look good. And which is
no, very cunning.
Yeah, which was cunning, which is what it was. But I remember over time, as I was like, okay, the first thing that came into my cunning mind, and the chap I had first been taken down to his rooms was what's his name? He went on to become an MP.
John Quigley.
John. So, and John, when I was brought into his office, he was pacing up and down his office and speaking really fast. And I'm like, this guy's a lunatic. But he was pacing up and down. And then he was the one that looked at me and said to me, you better make yourself look good. So in my cunning mind, it was like, okay, well, I'm going to make myself look good in front of this judge. So I'm going to go around to all the drug rehabilitation centres and I'm going to see if I can help out.
Yeah.
And I said that to him and he looked at me again and he said, you better do whatever makes yourself look good. And it was, I went from a drug rehabilitation centre to a drug, and then I ended up in Holyoke, which is the Australian Institute of Alcohol and Addiction. And that was really when I started to understand, okay, you've got a problem.
Yeah.
Right, you're 26 years old, you're a drug addict, you're an alcoholic, and you've got a problem. And let alone do you have a problem, but what you're doing and how you're behaving is contributing to the problem in society that has you in this situation. And I was like, right. But it was then over that time period, I think we were like 3 years waiting to get to court.
Yeah.
And that was a very difficult 3 years. And then we ended up with a lawyer out of Sydney and 2 QCs in the room.
Good heavens.
Yeah, with 2 QCs, a lawyer out of Sydney, a woman named, her name will come to me in a minute, and she was a very infamous lawyer. And it had cost us I think it cost us like $300,000 to be able to get to that situation. And I remember being in there and the first day going in, first off knowing that, feeling like, okay, I've done a lot. I've tried to give back as much as I can.
Yeah.
And there was definitely a time period where I had done everything that I could to give back. And I remember when we were found guilty, I was like, I can't believe I've just been found. I was devastated. But we were sent away then for sentencing, and you'd said, okay, send the boys away. They've got to go to Canning Vale Remand Centre.
Yeah.
Canning Vale Remand Centre was one of these places which was like a no man's land. So people didn't know whether they were going to get 20 years.
Yeah.
Or they didn't know whether they're going to be released.
Yeah.
So everybody was on pretty good behaviour. And when I get in there, I'd met some other criminals that I'd known from the outside world that were drug dealers like me. And when I said who my judge was, I remember them saying to me, okay, you just need to get as many people to the courtroom as you can. And the day I walked out into the courtroom, you had walked out with a folder. But before you walked out with the folder, before you come in, I walked into and there was like 150 people in the room.
Yes.
It was chock or block. People sitting around my parents, people just looking at me going, you're going to be fine, it's going to be okay. And I remember standing there and thinking, and all I could feel was love. It was like, these people love me for who I am and not for what I've done.
Yeah.
So what you've done is not going to define you. And I remember
And
you
you
coming
put
out the folder down of references, and it would have been this thick. And you put your hand on the folder, and you looked over at me, and you said, and then you looked to the room, and you said, I can see that these boys are loved.
Yeah.
But I have no option as a result of the severity of this crime to hand down a custodial sentence.
Yeah.
But of course, in that moment, you go into just panic mode.
Yeah.
But that statement of compassion and understanding of that scenario, because you had obviously a very deep emotional understanding of what was happening in that room at that moment, and you had put a lot of time into reading those references and understanding what had gone on to be able to handle the room the way you handled it. And I just felt so blessed. I mean, after time, first you're annoyed. You go into shock, you're annoyed.
Yeah.
You think, I've done everything. Why would you do this to me? You go back into drug dealer mode. You open your eyes, shut your mouth, keep your ears closed, and just get on with your time. But over time, I realised that those words were very significant that had come out of you and said that there was a high level of care and compassion for the people that were obviously coming in front of you. And I just wanted you to know that was a very important moment which defined and let me see that, hey, you did the wrong thing. If you're going to do the crime, you're going to do the time. But you were very fair about how you handled us. And I deeply, deeply appreciate that from you.
Well, that's incredibly generous of you. But quite often you don't have a lot of choice, because if you don't sentence the way the law has set it down, the Court of Appeal will just change it. And frequently they will give a lot more than I would have given in the first place. So you can't even afford, from a legal point of view, to be overly generous with people, because you may not be doing them a favour. They may get worse. But it's a tribute to you as well that you had the right mental attitude. I mean, no doubt you got a terrible shock. And it is a shock. It's one of the great life changes, going to jail. And considering that you also had the drug problems beforehand. But the fact that you've managed to overcome it and that you developed the right mental attitude is something that it would be wonderful if everyone in prison could be taught that, because most of them are only young, and with the right mental attitude and a bit of effort, they may not be as successful as you, but they could restart their lives and rebuild their lives quite easily.
Yeah, I firmly believe that it just takes the right mental attitude and the proper guidance.
Yeah.
And we'll get into that as we go through a little bit, I think, because I have some questions around that. But can I ask, how did you, behind all great comedy is great tragedy. Behind most doctors, nurses and carers, have had a lack of care in their childhood. So that becomes important to them. And most police officers, judges, lawyers, there's an injustice happened somewhere along the way, or some sort of, how did you become a judge and such a, we'll get into it as we go through, but such a well-recognised judge within West Australian law?
Well, I just had a mother who had 3 rules. There were only 3 rules in our house. You had to be kind to everyone, get yourself an education and go to church on Sunday. And as long as you live under my roof, young lady, you will go to church on Sunday. But you had to be kind to everyone and get yourself an education. My mother didn't have the chance to have an education. And she could see the value of it for a better life, apart from being able to support yourself, just a better life. And so that was these were the 3 things that were vital to her. And so I go to church on Sunday. I got myself an education. And being kind was just sort of ingrained, because now that my mother's dead, I have this feeling she's watching. And if I'm not kind to everybody, but so far as sentencing is concerned, it wasn't so much kindness. I mean, some people think it was kindness, and the men in the profession who so thoroughly disapprove of my appointments thought it was unprofessionalism and emotionalism, and why would they appoint a woman? But the 12 months before my appointment, I'd spent doing a whole course, as it turned out, on criminology.
Right.
And there was so much work being done that on the fact that you just couldn't jail your way out of these problems.
Mm-hmm.
And the statistics were showing, and I think, as you said to me, the definition of madness is doing something that doesn't work and then just keep on doing it.
Right.
Well, in many cases, that's what prison is.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of my sentencing was based on the study that I'd done,
Mm-hmm.
rather than either that I was lenient or that I was an emotional, unprofessional woman who didn't understand reality.
Mm-hmm.
So, and there's been a lot of research.
Yeah.
And the little story I've always told when I give a speech is about the two men fishing
Right.
in the river, and bodies start coming down the river, and they're pulling the bodies out, and eventually one of them says to the other, "You stay here and do what you can, and I'll go upstream and find out what's causing them to fall in."
Right.
Now that's where we should be, upstream, finding out what's causing them to fall in.
Yeah.
And down at the bottom, pulling the bodies out.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's nice, but that's about all it is.
Mm. And then, so, I mean, you were the first female appointed judge
in Western Australia.
How was that? And when? Sorry.
Well,
first off,
that's a
when was it, and how was it?
It was 1985, and that is a question a lot of men ask in the profession. How could this possibly? How could this black day possibly have
Really?
come? Oh yeah.
That was
Did you
the
get a lot
mentality.
of that?
Oh, a lot. Yeah. A lot of nastiness. That doesn't mean everyone was
Yeah.
like it. And I'm not for 1 minute suggesting everyone was like it. But there were a lot of them who were. And there would be occasions, I can tell you, when some of my sentencing would hit the newspapers where judges would not talk to me in the corridors.
Wow.
So it was difficult.
It's incredibly, it's like pioneering and being the lead in that space is incredibly courageous and incredibly.
Well,
I didn't
know that. I needed Sir Humphrey Appleby there when I said yes, I'll take the job, to say courageous.
Right.
And so, of course, the minister at the moment, he says that is very courageous. The minister doesn't do it. So if I thought it was courageous, I may not have done it.
Yeah, I suppose, because it happens just like it would have happened organically in a sense,
Yeah.
and then you would have been hit with some of the feedback, I suppose. Yeah.
This is right.
Yeah.
You don't think, I'm quite a nice little person. What have I done to deserve all this hostility?
Yeah, yeah. Did it last for long, or did it?
Yeah, and how did you handle it?
Oh, well, you go home and you shut the door and you have a long drink and you say, golly gosh, what a bad lot.
Yeah.
And no, privately you do, but you can't. That again would have been seen as a sign of weakness, to say I'm being badly treated here.
Yeah.
No, you're not being badly treated. You're an idiot and you're unprofessional, and we're telling you. Yeah.
And then, so did you watch that? Because you retired. I think you were saying you retired about 10 years ago.
When did I retire? 2005, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's 19 years ago. And on retirement, where were you positioned then?
I was the head of the court by then, which was, someone asked me how that could have happened, how the turnaround, and I said, well, if you're a Christian, you believe God did it, and if you're not, you believe good luck. Right. I don't know how that slowly turned around, but to some extent it was that younger judges were coming in.
Right.
And every 10 years there seemed to be a change in male attitudes, so that the men when I came in who were close to 70 just weren't going to cope.
Right.
And the men who were in their 60s were a bit better, and the men who were in their 50s were a bit better than that.
Right.
And then by the time it came to who's going to be the chief judge, most of the judges were younger than me.
Right.
They wouldn't dare
Right.
refuse to talk to me in the corridors.
Yeah.
Right.
And outside, I think in some ways they'd given up. On each,
Sorry. Who? The younger judges?
no, there were judges in other courts. It
Right.
wasn't only our own court, and there were senior solicitors, and a
Right.
lot of them had moved on
Mm-hmm.
or died.
Mhm.
One of my friends who was an academic once said to me, "Oh, Tony, what are you going to do?" And I said, "I'm going to outlive them all." And I did, most of them.
Yeah,
Or they
yeah.
retired.
Yeah,
and-
yeah.
yeah.
I mean, that must have been difficult watching them, that state of righteousness amongst men, and how the sentencing that would have been handed down to people. And I mean,
Yeah.
you told me a story once about a couple of kids that had broken into a push bike factory.
Yeah, that was when very early on, they'd broken into a push bike factory, 3 of them, and they stole a push bike each. Now, no doubt, if you're the owner of the push bike factory, you'd like to give them a good kick in the
Yeah.
bottom.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't care if they went to jail for a long time. But
Yeah.
for the rest of us, they're teenage boys, and they have given in to temptation. They've got no record or anything, and they steal a push bike. Now, the prosecutor gets up and says, "Oh, no, they must go to jail, da-di-da." And I thought, oh, she's only saying that. She couldn't possibly mean it.
Yeah.
And so I didn't jail them. I gave them community service and ordered them to do some work in the community.
Mhm.
And the bikes were recovered. They'd taken them apart, so they had to put them back again. And then the next thing, they've lodged an appeal against this serious, that you would actually jail 3 teenage boys for stealing push bikes. But they went on with the appeal. At that stage, the Chief Justice who sat on the appeal was a man who really understood that sentencing was out of hand, and he just threw it out. But
Right.
later, there was a later Chief Justice who didn't share his views on those things. So, but fortunately, by then I think they stopped trying to jail every teenager who
My God.
appeared in court. You just can't. You can't give up on an 18-year-old.
So did you see that turn around in your time?
Yeah,
That you saw
I think
that.
I did that sort of thing at there became a realisation, and it became more known in the community that you just wouldn't. That these teenage boys just, I mean, you put them 10 years behind. I mean, I say they can recover with the right attitude, and Mitch is a walking example of it. But the right attitude and some proper help. Not that I think he had any proper help, but proper help. They can turn their lives around, but it does put you behind, and it puts you behind all your mates and everything. And often it teaches you to be a better criminal. You see, teenagers are caught very easily. But once they've had some time in jail and they're talking to their mates in jail and they say, well, this is what, oh, the guy says to him, that was your mistake. This is the way you should have done it. And so it's a school for crime, that you learn better ways. You learn how not to get caught next time. Yeah.
One of the questions I wanted to ask you was, in some of the cases that you would have seen over time, how did you not get emotionally involved in it, or was it that you were emotionally involved in each case? You know, how did you keep your emotions out of it, or did you use your emotions to allow what was happening in the courtroom?
It's very hard to analyse yourself. But I wouldn't have said that I did. I mean, that's what the critics said, you're over emotional. But I didn't feel emotional. I'd read the material and I was applying the material. And certainly...
And when you say the material, you mean the law?
Law,
Okay.
yeah. The law and the research. I mean, with prisons, there's a lot of research that's been done, very well-based research on what works, what doesn't, what's useless, and all this sort of stuff. There was a lot of that, and it is the case that in many cases there's a mean option and a decent option.
Yeah.
And you can rely on some people to always take the mean option.
Right.
And I tried to always take the decent option. And that's really, you can all thank my mother, because that was her attitude to life, and I grew up with that. But it really was the learning that I'd read about, that I've taken in, and I'm determined to apply it as best I can. I mean, you can't do much, but you can do it as best you can.
One of the things when we had a conversation last time when we first met, you said to me, you know, my mother, it wasn't a matter of excuse me, it wasn't a matter of be kind. It was a matter of no, you have to be kind.
Oh yeah.
And how do you think that has played out in your life?
Well, I'm too old now to know, but those things that you get from when you're about 3, they're just ingrained into you. I don't think to myself, oh, I think this is an opportunity for me to take the decent option.
Right.
I just find I do it because I've done it because my mother made me do it from when I was about 2.
Yeah, I love that, because I think that, you know, it's a bit like you will go to church, you will educate yourself, and you will be kind.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, I look and I think, speaking to you, that played a role in your compassion towards people who were in situations that were horrific.
Yeah.
And like we were talking earlier, and we were talking about the fact that you'd said to me, look, I saw situations, Mitch, where the children was actually better being.
That's right. I mean, people talk about, you know, what they're roaming the streets and why don't they go home, thinking that they're just kids who need their aura adjusted. But they're not. These are kids who are safer locked out of the house than in. Inside the houses is alcohol, violence, sexual violence, demeaning behaviour, and often crowds of people who are all drunk. I remember once acting for a young woman who'd stabbed someone she thought was going to rape her, and when she was being cross-examined and they asked her something about, why didn't you go to one of the adults in the house? And she said, everyone else in the house was plastered. Now, there's nowhere to go if every adult, she was about 17, if every adult in the house is plastered,
well,
what do you do? They are better off. And so to lock themselves out. And also, this has been going on since they were born. I mean, they've had no relief from this their entire life. And the lives some of them have had, it's just hard to take in that people in our own city, in our own country, are living these hideous lives where kids are locked out of the house. I had one young man who used to be forced to eat out of a dog bowl because his father thought he was a dog. And there are so many little mean stories, apart from the, you know, why didn't you go home because Dad would have given me a flogging, this sort of thing. There is a lot of sadness in this world.
Tell me about one of the things that you had done through your career that I had heard about through the system as a prisoner, was that you'd gone to Warraloo prison and you'd gone through which was like, when I was like, she did what? She went where? I couldn't comprehend, but then I could comprehend because you were someone that wanted to see change. And so I just wanted to know what was the motivation behind you doing
I
that?
don't understand what the big deal is of
Well, Warraloo is a prison.
Yeah.
Okay, so to have a judge go to a prison.
Right. Just the fact that the judge was in the prison.
Oh
right,
my!
got
Like
it.
you should hear what happens when a police officer walks through
Right,
through
okay,
a
got it.
jail. Like it's crazy. The place
Yeah.
erupts.
Well, no, they wrote to me. I think they had their own branch of, this was Warraloo, I think they might have had a branch of Rotary or something like
Right,
that.
right.
And they wanted, it was at night time I went, and Warraloo's quite a hike out. But it was important. It was important for their, it seemed to me it was important for their sense of self-esteem, to give them the knowledge that I valued them, to give them the knowledge that I've already said to you. Most of them are really young. They can get their lives back. They think it's the end of the world and they'll never be accepted again.
Yeah.
But that's not true, because they're very young, and Australia is not, despite the newspapers demanding hang everybody, Australians are not that punitive. Once a person has paid their penalty, provided they get on with their life in a law-abiding way, most Australians will overlook, will just put that past behind them. And I really wanted them to know that they were just normal like the rest of us, and other people have invited me to speak and I've gone to speak, and so why wouldn't I go there and speak?
So did you actually speak to the prisoners?
Oh yeah, they had, it's so long ago, I might have had dinner there.
Right.
So they had
A hall set up.
a hall set up, and I might have had dinner there, I think, and then I spoke after the dinner.
Right.
And then they asked me questions.
Tell me, through the process of, waiting to go to waiting to go to court,
Yeah.
and we had shopped around and moved around with different lawyers, and we had come across some really, really incredible lawyers, like who were just very, very good, and like the likes of Sharifs and these guys out of Melbourne who were just very, how they operated was just next level. And did you find when you were in a courtroom with a lawyer who was highly skilled, how was that for you?
It's very helpful. And that's why it's a lot easier. The more you go up the levels of the judiciary, the easier it gets.
Right.
Because the lawyers are better trained, they are more on the ball, they've got all the cases. The judge is not going to make a mistake by not getting the right case, because they're going to make sure you've got the right case.
Right.
And the right understanding of that case.
Right.
So the better they are, the better it is for the judge.
So their intellect makes it easier for you
Yeah, it makes the judge look a lot better.
Right.
A lot better. And even with the High Court, for a while there, when they weren't giving people legal aid to go to the High Court, they had a lot of people acting for themselves. And when the lawyers started coming back, Mary Gaudron, who is now retired, but she was the first woman on the High Court, said to them, there's no doubt that absence makes the heart grow fonder.
Right.
Because with people acting for themselves, they don't know what they're doing. They don't understand the case law. They can't explain it to you. So you've got to do all the work yourself. Whereas if you've got a top counsel, he doesn't want you to make a mistake. He wants to tell you, these are the relevant cases and this is what they mean.
And when we say the relevant cases, we're talking about comparisons of your ruling, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So if you're ruling on, is this evidence admissible? And they'll have 7 cases that say, no, it's not, if they don't want it to be, and why their cases are the ones you should follow. Now, if the prosecution's got any sense, they'll have cases on the opposite.
Right.
And but it's very important, and it's a lot easier if you have top lawyers who have all this stuff and they do it all for you.
Would you get excited knowing if these guys were going to be in town or what was happening, or have you?
No. I'm not really given to excitement about things. No, I can't say. Sometimes you'd come out with admiration. I can remember there was a lawyer from South Australia who ended up Chief Justice of the Northern Territory, Brian Martin. Now, he was a prosecutor in the case I did, and he was just outstanding. And it was just amazing to watch him operate.
Right.
And so that was interesting. But there are other lawyers who help you just as much, but he just had a whole manner as well as the cases and everything like that.
And then if, as you've gone through your career, what are your thoughts on the Australian judicial system? What do you think could be bettered? Where do you think we're heading with it?
The trouble is, I think on the whole that it's excellent, because certainly apart from some funny things that happened in New South Wales a few years back, the judiciary in Australia has never had any thought that it's corrupt in any way, or that you could get through to it with bribes or anything like that. It's part of the system of democracy in that there are different roles for the Parliament, the Executive and the Judiciary. You come in and you sit in the middle, and everyone knows that you're sitting in the middle, so you're not allowed to be on one side or the other side. You must be sitting in the middle, and you keep everybody at a distance so that no one's getting a better deal than anyone else. No one's getting a look in better than anyone else. And so I think that it's pretty good. However, what has to be faced is that I also adapted. When it came time, before I was a judge, to do things for women lawyers, and we had we were part of a subcommittee, and there were 4 women on it. We all looked at each other and we all sort of said in unison, well, we've all adapted. I mean, we've adapted to the male way of doing everything.
Right.
And we no longer know what's wrong with this from a female point of view, because we've just adapted. And it may be the same with the judiciary, that there's a lot I don't know that's wrong with it, because I've adapted.
Right.
And it's too late for me to now start making criticisms.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a period of time, of course, when judges were abominably rude, but that changed, and it changed very quickly. I can remember saying to one of the other women judges, when I was a lawyer, judges were rude, and now I'm a judge, lawyers are rude.
Right.
And she agreed with me.
Right.
They're not really, but...
You've seen it from both sides.
Yeah, but the fact is that was a terrible aspect of of sections of the judiciary, but that seems to have gone now. That doesn't happen. But as for other things, I mean, a lot of improvement has happened in sexual assault and pedophilia cases for the complainants in those cases. But a lot of that came from outside the law. We'd all adapted. And the fact that they can give evidence from a remote room. And we started that in Western Australia, I mean. And it was a woman lawyer and a male judge and some other people, but they had material from people who weren't lawyers, so that children no longer come into court and haven't for years, and now adult complainants in sexual assault matters don't have to go into court either.
Right.
And there are things like that that have improved quite a lot. And no doubt there are other things, particularly in those very sensitive areas, that could be changed. I'm not quite sure, and as I say, I adapted.
Yeah.
It seems to be going okay to me.
Yeah.
I mean, it would. I'm sitting in the best seat in town.
Yeah. And so the separation of emotional connection to what's going on in the room, it just becomes about what the law says and your job.
What the law and it's not only the law, it's the research and the statistics. And then, as I say, if there's two options, the mean option and the decent option, one hopes that we all take the decent option.
Yeah.
So when you say, you've spoken a bit about the research that you've done alongside that, would you consider other people did that same level?
No, not when I first started. What happened was I was on the Catholic Social Justice Commission, and they decided that they were going to put out a statement on prisons. So they looked at me and said, "You're the only lawyer, you can chair it." So we got together a committee, and every month we had a meeting, and we had visitors. We brought in psychiatrists, psychologists, people who were lecturing in criminology, people who worked in welfare in the prisons, and we brought them in every month. And we also did a great deal of reading, and that was the 12 months before I became a judge.
Right.
So I had all that, and I assumed everybody did, as you do. If you know something, you just think, oh, everybody knows this.
Yeah.
But they didn't. And so they assumed I was an emotional, unprofessional woman who needed, well, really, if they could have sacked me, they would have.
Do you think they would have?
Oh, yeah.
Well, because were they just not happy? Was it just this archaic mindset that they just couldn't see past the female?
Oh, no, it was, the then Chief Judge called me in and said, "You are embarrassing the other judges." It was rather noticeable.
My God. I mean, that must have been tough. Did that drive you to want to prove? Was that
no, I don't. I'm one of these scared type of people. Surprised. I know I don't sound it, but I'm old now, so I don't have to. But when I was younger, I was just devastated, and I half believed it, but I couldn't give up because I had a mortgage, money. You just can't give up your job, and I knew they couldn't sack me. They can't sack judges except on bad behaviour,
right.
And I hadn't done anything criminal,
right.
And then it takes a motion before both houses of Parliament. So I knew they couldn't sack me, but it was just
that's tough,
devastating.
Yeah. How long before more women came through?
It was 7 years,
right.
And of course I always said that part of the reason for treating me so badly was to make sure that no other woman would be appointed.
Really?
And that's my theory.
That's how you saw it.
There's no evidence
right.
for that at all. But really, when some of the women sort of gave tacit approval to the criticisms of me, I thought to myself, you're really doing yourself.
Yeah.
Because as long as they think this about me, they're going to use it as an excuse not to appoint another woman. But it was 7.5 years.
Well, it must have been lonely in that women's bathroom every night.
Yeah.
I'm the only person in here.
Oh, no, you shared with the secretaries. The men had two.
Okay.
On the old building, the men had 2 lots of loos. They had one called judges and one called men. I kid you not.
Really?
Yes.
That is insane.
Yeah, one called judges, one called men. But all we had was one cubicle, and that was for the secretaries and the judge.
Wow.
Yeah. But that has improved in the new building.
And then, so when this new female judge came in...
improved it. She and I were never close. That's not a criticism of her. We were different. We were never close, but that didn't make any difference. The fact that it was as though, you know, they'd lost the fight.
Really?
And the next judge came in, and then after that, a few years after her, there were more. And then there were several judges, and also the male judges coming in were younger, and that helped as well. So those things helped.
Right.
Yeah.
So there was you witnessed this, as you said earlier. It started to adapt these older judges, these archaic view of criminality, and all started to get waned out. And
I think so, quite a lot. That doesn't mean that it's completely, or that they're all agreeing with me. They're not. But I think there's been an improvement in the knowledge, because there are now criminology courses in the university, which there weren't when we all went through. That's why it was unique that I'd sort of done this thing the year before. But there's criminology there, there's lots of material for people to read. And some realisation, you know, 12 months in jail goes a lot slower than 12 months out.
Oh, yeah.
I can remember one of my fellow judges telling me this story when he was a lawyer and his client was convicted and was sentenced to jail, and he went to see the client and he said, look, the only thing I can say to you is that every day in prison is one day better, because every day in prison is one day less.
Yep.
And he said to me, I learnt that in boarding school. And I nearly burst into tears, speaking of this 10-year-old boy sent from the country to boarding school, who could only get through it by telling himself every day is better, because every day is one day less. So you don't know where this little suffering's going on.
A different form of prison, perhaps.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to ask you a couple of questions. If you'd one piece of advice you could give me from your whole life, what would it be?
No, it's at this point you see that I've started to become a proselytiser and tell you to go to church as your mum told you to.
Okay.
But I think it's apart from the religious stuff, developing your own sense of self-worth, and your own sense of confidence in yourself, and the realisation that you're stronger than other people in some things and weaker than them in other things. So you don't have to either feel inferior to them, and you've got no reason to feel superior to them either. So, but get out of your own way and do something. Don't just sit around whinging that you have these problems. You can find somebody who will help you with them. And if the first person you go to is not much help, go to someone else and keep looking, because you know what issues you have to deal with them. So deal with them. And I like the Nike slogan, which is just do it. That is, don't wait until you feel like it. Don't wait until all the circumstances are right, because if you wait until you feel like it, or all the circumstances are right, it's not going to happen. You just do it regardless of your feelings.
I like that.
I love that. What is the greatest thing that someone else has ever done for you?
I don't know. My mother, she obviously was the biggest influence.
Definitely.
Loving me, I think. And some of the primary school teachers I had who went out of their way to make sure I could read and write and even swim. I think those are the sort of things, that personal interactions rather than some gigantic thing. I can't think of anything sort of.
I think that's like oftentimes those personal interactions
Yeah.
are the greatest thing.
Yeah,
do you know what I
they
mean?
are, yeah.
That doesn't have to be something grandiose. But it is grandiose in its.
Well, I've heard interviews before where people have been asked that, and they've got this program on Sunday on ABC Radio National, The Year That Made Me, and along comes some famous person and talks about, and I think, I don't think I've got anything like that. But there's a lot of people that I'm sort of grateful to for their telling me things, teaching me things on the way.
Because I think some of our unsung heroes, stopping and taking the time to just think and acknowledge, some of the efforts that people put in. And I think some of the greatest unsung heroes that we have are our teachers and are our parents.
Yeah.
We have to go through that phase where you have to own one day that your parents don't know everything.
Well, this is
And then
right.
you have to own the day you have to cut them off and go and do your own thing. But until you become a parent, you never really realise how much a parent actually loved you and how much time and effort actually goes in.
Well, this is right. A lot of people say that. And I've said to a few young people in my court, who've, you get the reports and there are problems with their parents. And I've said to them, I know your parents are not perfect, but then neither are you, are you? And so, and I hope, particularly if the parents are in court, I mean, just having parents in court, they should be grateful. So few. I mean, you have young people come along for the most horrendous crimes. Not a soul in court to support them. No one. Or you can even say, where's your mum? Oh, she couldn't come today, So it's...
Last and final question. What's the most profound experience from your life?
No, again, I mean, I'm cutting out all religion on the basis that people say, think to themselves, that woman mentions religion again. I'll do something dreadful. No.
You don't need to filter religion.
You
If
don't
it's
have to
religion,
if that's
if
your
it's-
answer.
if that's your
then
answer,
Well,
then-
that is my answer, really. I don't proselytise. I'm not trying to make anybody be anything. But for me, and it really, my mother started it, as you know.
Yeah.
My mother started it, but she didn't finish it. I mean, there came times when I had severe personal problems. And you could have gone anywhere, I suppose. Well, I went to church and started praying, and you have, when you pray as hard as I did during that period, you do have spiritual experiences that I'm not called to tell people about, but you just do, and it just becomes stunning in your life, but it's not something you can really share with other people. But if things get bad enough, I recommend popping into a church somewhere.
It's funny you say that.
I was literally just thinking that. Go on, tell it.
Because I don't consider myself a religious person. I consider myself someone who is very intrigued by spirituality, and that's where most of my life's research has been, around understanding the energy of what we are. But when the poop hit the fan, that's where I ended up. I ended up in front of an altar numerous times, but it was one day I'd ended up in a really hairy situation. I'd had a gun put in my mouth. There was silencers, all that sort of stuff. It was a very dangerous situation. And I left that scenario and the first place I went to was actually the church opposite, is it St. John of God's Hospital?
Yeah, St. John of God's.
St. John of God's Hospital there.
Oh,
The
St.
Catholic.
Joseph.
St.
St.
Joseph's
Joseph's,
in Wembley.
yeah. I ended up in St. Joseph's, and I was literally on the altar on my hands and knees, and I was just like, whatever you do, just stop, because I couldn't stop. I literally, Antoinette, I couldn't stop. I was so addicted. I was so caught in it.
Yeah.
Just the lifestyle and the drug taking and the partying and everything that went, the stature, the recognition for who you were, all the stuff that went along with that. I just couldn't get out of it. I knew, I'd been studying metaphysics and I'd been studying spirituality and all that stuff, and the more I studied, the problem was the more I was realising that I'm not who I'm meant to be. This is not how you're not down here to do this.
Yeah.
This is not why you turned up here. So that was where I ended up. I was in a church going, buddy, if you're there, and I remember walking out, and I knew walking out, you're going to be caught. That's what's about to happen to you. You're about to get arrested. You're going to get caught, and that was what.
Because you knew that was the only way.
It was the only way
that you were going to stop.
It was the only way that was going to stop me. Was if I was stopped and thrown in jail.
But the thing that the fact that you asked for it made the process, as much as it was not easy, it made it like it was a part almost of your like this is what I asked for. Yeah. This is what I because it was, it was what you asked for.
Totally.
You just were like, I need to get out of this.
I have to stop. I have to get out. And the funny thing was, when I was leaving, when I was leaving primary school, not the headmaster, who's the one, the vice principal came around, and he had a Bible, and he walked into every kid, because we were all leaving primary school, and he walked into the classrooms, and he stood up the front of the classroom, and he said, put the Bible down at the table, and here was his piece of advice. He said, if ever you end up in a court and you have to put your hand on a Bible, never lie. And I remember sitting to myself as a kid in that room, thinking to myself, oh, that's going to happen to me, and I'm going to lie through my teeth. I remember it clearly. From that point on, I used to have nightmares as a kid, seeing myself in a green uniform behind a reservoir. Yeah, from 12 years old, I had numerous nightmares throughout my life where it was like my future was being shown to me throughout my life up until I ended up in that actual situation. But the funny thing was,
God was trying to get a message through. You were a bit slow.
Yeah, I was obviously not picking up. Or sometimes the way I look at it is that the universe or life or God or whatever we want to call it was trying to say, this is going to be part of your journey. And when it happens,
you. And then there you are in church, and here you are now, being super successful. So when you get up there, he might say, I think you're a bit ungrateful, Mitch.
Oh, I hope not. I absolutely hope not. Because, I mean, if I look back on any of it, honestly, Antoinette, it was, just key people play a certain role in your life. Yeah. And they're in for a minute or they're in for a lifetime. And you played such a key role in saving my butt. I am so appreciative of how you handled their situation, let alone for me, but for my parents, for everybody else that was involved. There was a lot of people who were really, really...
Well, that's what happens. Yeah. A lot of people are affected.
Oh, yeah. Oh yeah, but it was your leniency and your compassion and your understanding of the situation, and the fact I don't know whether every judge reads the references or whether every judge reads the room, but I know you walking out there definitely were moved by what had happened and what was going on, and you were very present with me in that room that day, letting me know, buddy, and that changed my life, and I'm.
Oh,
really
it's very lovely of you to say that, but you also had a lot of amazing qualities. I mean, that's the proof of the pudding's in the eating, and where you are now is amazing in the circumstances. Yeah,
I would 100% agree with that, but I also want to say from a different perspective that if your mother hadn't been the way she'd been, and therefore you hadn't been the way you'd been, and Mitch shown up, the amount of people that even are listening to this podcast or have been touched in some way by the work he was able to do from the fact that you listened to yourself and you had that from your mum and then pass that on to Mitch. It's not just his life that he saved, it's also the lives of many, 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 many people, including my own, in lots of ways. So there's an appreciation, I know, from not just from him, but there's from the perspective of all the people that got the chance to have the help from that scenario.
Yeah.
So
it was magical. It was magical.
Thank you so much for your time, Antoinette. That was lovely.
Oh, thank
really,
you.
We really
lovely.
appreciate you coming in. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That's really kind of you. What a very uplifting day I've had, and you've got the most beautiful soft eyes.
Thank you.
What